Welcome back to the Theology of Business podcast with host Darren Shearer. This is the show that helps marketplace Christians to partner with God in business to help you make disciples of your company, your industry, and your community. If you want to learn more about how to do business for the glory of God and shape culture through discipling the business world, this show is for you. You can get more of the Theology of Business Institute's interviews and teachings like the one you're about to hear at theologyofbusiness.com.
On this episode, we're joined by Mark Whitacre. Mark is Chief Operating Officer of CBMC, an organization that has impacted his life greatly over the past 2 decades. That's probably an understatement. You're going to find that out here in just a minute if you don't know Mark's story. And CBMC, we've mentioned CBMC a number of times on this podcast, but it's one of the most prominent pioneering organizations in the faith and work movement over the past century, started back in the 1930s. And since December of 2006, he has been the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Science Officer at Cypress Systems Incorporated. And if the name Mark Whitacre is ringing a bell, his undercover work with the FBI during the ADM scandal, the Archer Daniels Midland scandal, was the inspiration for the major motion picture The Informant, starring Matt Damon as Mark Whitacre. And drawing from his unique history, Mark provides a one-of-a-kind insight into corporate ethics, corporate greed, and the warning signs of a flawed corporate leadership. Mark, welcome to the Theology of Business podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to join you. Thank you for having me.
So for those who haven't heard your testimony, could you just tell us what was it like starting your career at ADM?
I started in October of 89. I would have been 32 years old. ADM at that time, it's even larger today. ADM's the 40th largest company in America today, the 40th. I joined, we were the 56th largest company in America in October of 89 with 30,000 employees, 70 billion in revenue. And I was number 4 ranked executive out of 30,000 executives. I was divisional president of the biotech division and reporting right to the vice chairman of the company. And the president was 69 years old and the CEO was 75 years old. So I was half the age of the executives above me. So I saw plenty of room to move up, and there were only 3 slots above me.
Wow. And you got your own jet, right? I mean, you were flying pretty high at that point.
The 7 top executives did get, and they still do, I think, even today, but each have their own Falcon 50, and being ranked number 4, I had my own Falcon 50 at 32 years old, and boy, did I think I was a rock star at that time. I even had air back then.
So you're really kind of at the mountaintop of your career at this point. I mean, and you're just starting out. I mean, gosh, I can only imagine one of the youngest executives in all of Fortune 500 companies at this point. And so the stakes are pretty high. You've got a lot to lose if something goes south in the company. But then things you started to get involved in something called price fixing that some of our audience may not be familiar with, especially with our international audience. What is price fixing and how did you get involved in it?
Yeah, price fixing is basically the way capitalism is built in the United States, and the reason why prices stay, for the most part, fairly competitive and fairly low is because just think of a car manufacturer. They're competing against each other. Honda's competing with Ford. They're competing with Hyundai and so on. And that drives the prices to a more fair price. Even though consumers may think they're high, just think what it would be if there was only one car manufacturer. Then they would, they could be double or triple what they would be today. Well, the same way with food additives. ADM was one of the largest food additive companies in the world. Your listeners, whatever they have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner today will likely have something from ADM in it. They make the ingredients that would go like in Kellogg's cereal. If you look at Coca-Cola and Pepsi and iced tea or an orange juice, they have ingredients in those beverages. You look at a Pillsbury or a Kraft. It'd be difficult to buy a processed food and put in your grocery cart from the grocery store that does not have something from ADM in it. Again, one of the largest food additive companies in the world. But capitalism means you compete with your competitors, and that keeps prices down, and therefore the consumers can get a good price for their coffee, their beverages, their sodas, their breakfast cereals, and so on, and bread and so on. But if your competitors are working together, which is illegal, they form an international cartel and they start working together, they then can drive the prices up by taking out the competition, taking out the element of capitalism out of it. And that's exactly what was happening at ADM. It was actually happening and proven in court 12 years before I joined them. But the fact that the CEO was heading towards 80 years of age, they started teaching younger guys, and I was one of the guys they saw as a future leader, being the number 4 executive. They started training me mentoring me to do the price fixing.
Mm. And so they probably didn't start out mentoring by saying, "Hey, what we're doing is illegal, by the way, so keep this hush hush," or did they?
No, they didn't. I was a couple of years with the company by this point. Excuse me. I joined them in '89. It was 1992 when the vice chairman came back to my office, gave me a large bonus, lots of stock, and I'm talking close to a 7-figure bonus. And about an hour later, I came back to my office, and then I understood what that bonus was for. He told me he was going to sign a mentor to me. Now that I've been with the company long enough that I'm trusted and they see me as part of the family, they were going to sign a mentor to me to show me how ADM does business. And he started describing to me what I was going to be trained to do. And then I understood exactly what it was, which was the price fixing. But I tell you, I had a very high compensation, $350,000 a year base salary. This is 1989. And bonuses that would add up between $1 and $3 million a year between the stock options and bonuses. And at that age, and full of myself and all about power and greed and materialism, I wasn't willing to walk away from it. And I thought these guys, being 30, 40 years my senior, they had a lot more business experience than me. I just thought, well, this is how business is done in the real world.
Yeah.
So I rationalized and said, it must be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you remember, was there a moment when you recognized that, whoa, what I'm doing is actually illegal? Because usually it takes compliance getting involved before, somebody recognizes that what they're doing is, borderline or is just outright illegal. I mean, how did you figure out that this is not, had you studied antitrust law or anything like that? How did you know that this was illegal?
Well, I have a PhD in biochemistry from Cornell. So price fixing and cartels, I was president of the biotech division, and most executives in biotech or pharmaceutical, most of them are science background more than they are business school graduates. I realized a lot of corporations would have MBAs as their top leaders and as their CEOs and divisional presidents and so on. But in the biotech world, in the scientific world, a lot of your top management are more scientific related than they are business. But I still knew what price fixing was. I knew what international cartels. I remember reading about it years ago when the oil companies would fix prices and gas prices would go up because of price fixing. So just through the media and newspapers, I knew it was illegal, and companies received large fines, and sometimes executives received prison sentences because of it. So I did know it was illegal, and my wife noticed something different about me during that time when I was starting to be mentored of that, and that's how the discussion came up with her and I talking about the price fixing.
Yeah, and she really had a way of framing the issue that really, really cut right to your heart. What was that conversation like?
Well, I was about 7 months into the price fixing scheme at this point, so it would have been November 1992. She could tell something was weighing heavily on my shoulders. Something changed. 3 years at ADM at that point, but those last 7 months, something had changed. And we started over. And I've known my wife since she was 7th grade and I was in 8th grade. So I've known her for decades, even at that point, as young as we were. And I started sharing with her what was going on and why, I was feeling differently. And when she really started digging in and really convinced me there's no way to rationalize yourself out of this. This is stealing from every consumer that goes to the grocery store.
And on the order of, say, maybe $4 for every $50 worth of groceries. Is that about right?
About $3 to $5. About every consumer to go to the grocery store in the 80s and 90s, it was going on for about 12 years. If they bought $50 worth of groceries, it would have been $3 to $5, depending what was in their grocery cart of theft. But when you take that and hundreds of millions of consumers around the world, we were earning an extra $1 billion a year doing it. Not a million, but $1 billion through the price fixing illegally.
Yeah. Wow. And so there came a point where you had to go and start putting a stop to this, but you don't. I've heard you say that you don't characterize yourself as a whistleblower, but as an informant, whereas your wife was really the whistleblower. How do you differentiate those two?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, when you look at it, I was so obsessed at that period of my life. I was showing up in Fortune magazine as likely to be the next COO of the company, the number 2. In other words, to go from divisional president to company president, from number 4 executive to 2. And I really got caught up in that world. I mean, I was almost addicted to that world. And I don't believe I would ever turn myself in if it wasn't for Ginger's encouragement after a very long discussion with her on that very day, November 5th, 1992. And basically, I mean, she really laid it out, to put it in black and white, that like even her grandma on $2 a week and $200 a week Social Security, a grocery bill being her largest bill, and we're stealing from her. And here we're living in a mansion with a corporate jet and a 8-car garage full of cars. And she felt very uncomfortable with that. And the more she felt uncomfortable with that, I started realizing, boy, I was rationalizing so much. I was basically making illegal activity like it's okay. Like, well, everybody's doing it, it must be okay. But when you look at it black and white, it was outright fraud. It was outright theft. It was $1 billion a year from every consumer going to the grocery store. And I turned myself in that day. And when something like that happens, I would say my wife, Ginger, was the whistleblower, and I was the informant. And the whistleblower is the one that sacrifices everything to do the right thing, and that was Ginger. Because really, I confessed to the FBI because of Ginger. An informant is somebody sitting in front of the FBI and has a choice to be arrested or start wearing a wire. And that was me.
Right.
And there's a huge difference between an informant and a whistleblower.
Hey, before we get back to this episode, I need to let you know about a new course we've developed here at the Theology of Business Institute called the Biblical Standards for Businesses course. Are you tired of hearing well-meaning statements about how God cares about your work in business, but not actually having much practical guidance on how to apply the Bible in business matters? Are you tired of having to rely primarily on non-Christian business gurus for useful guidance on how to run your business? Do you want to know what the Bible says about the fundamental aspects of business like innovation, competition, marketing, sales, customer care? What does the Bible say about quality control, management, human resources, accounting, business law, risk management? Given that we're called to set Christ-centered standards in business, which is really just another way of saying we're called to make disciples, we believe every Christian business executive, entrepreneur, and coach should be able to explain and apply what the Bible says about each of the core fundamentals of business. So join us in the Theology of Business Institute's Biblical Standards for Businesses course to discover and apply what the Bible says about business, so we can set industry standards and steward our companies in ways that reveal God's glory to the world around us. So head over to theologyofbusiness.com and click the tab that says course to learn more and enroll for the current semester. That's theologyofbusiness.com. Well, I shudder to think, what would have happened had you not been married to such a strong woman, or not been married at all, or, just had a spouse that was of lower character that would not have really pushed you to do the right thing. And you did do the right thing at that point and became an FBI informant. So then they cut you a deal and gave you immunity, and yet you still went to prison. Why'd you go to prison?
Well, basically, after wearing a wire I wore a wire every day every day for 3 years. It's the longest duration of anybody to wear a wire in U.S. history. No one wore a wire 10 hours a day for 3 years. And even in the FBI museum at the FBI headquarters, it has the equipment I wore undercover in their museum. That's how large this case was. It was the largest price fixing case at the time. It was the highest level executive that ever started wearing a wire for the FBI. And that still even holds true today, some 25 plus years later, and was also the longest duration of anybody wear a wire in U.S. history. And that still holds true today. And the reason, so I had full immunity for taking that risk. When the FBI would wire me up at 6 o'clock every morning, they'd say, boy, Mark, if these guys get you, they're going to kill you. This is serious stuff. And so they gave me immunity for gathering the evidence, only being 7 months with the crime at the time, a crime that was going on for 12 years, and basically being the informant and helping them bring this case to justice. So I had full immunity, and all I had to do was stay out on my own way and not break any laws that they didn't know about, because I was breaking the law doing price fixing, but they knew about it. So they wanted me to continue to participate in that. But what happened was I panicked after wearing wire for a couple of years. I for sure wasn't thinking clearly. I would be blowing the driveway off with gas leak blowers at 3 a.m. during thunderstorms, for example. I was falling apart wearing a wire. The longer I wore a wire, the more I was falling apart. And then when I came to realization that this career is coming to an end after 7 years having that career, I couldn't imagine life without that compensation, the plane, the house, the cars. I had a Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedeses. I mean, it was a life of a rock star. I couldn't imagine life not that way. And so what happened was I started thinking, I'm going to get fired when they learn that I'm the one that witnessed against them. And basically I had stock options that were in the millions, actually about 9 million at that time, that they were going to owe me, but I had a 5-year set of stock options that would have been worth about 9 million, but it was about a year away from when I could exercise them. You can only exercise them when that 5-year comes to an exercise date. Well, I was going to be fired for being the informant. They weren't going to let me stay there once they learned I was the witness, and I knew that. And so what happened was I started basically writing checks to myself to equate to what they were going to owe me on stock options, knowing I was never going to reach that stock option date. So basically I stole my own stock options a year before I could exercise them, knowing I was going to get fired. And I went to prison for that $9 million fraud and not the price.
Wow. And so you went to prison for how many years?
I had a 10-year sentence, but the way the federal system works, there's no parole, but you get 15% for good behavior. That's the maximum you get, is 15% off for good behavior. So I did 8.5 years on a 10-year sentence.
Wow. And yet the guys that were in the price fixing at ADM got max of 3 years, right?
That's right. Almost all of them. There were about 30 people convicted, 4 from just ADM alone. And then it led to other cases from those tapes. It led to a vitamin case, a citric acid case. People would continue to brag about their illegal activity. So it led to many cases beyond the product that we started with called lysine at ADM. So all together, it was about 30 defendants of all the cases, vitamin, citric acid, and so on. And the maximum they got were 3 years, because that was the maximum price fixing at that time, the maximum sentence. But now the Sentencing Commission has changed that. For that same dollar amount on price fixing today, it's a 10-year sentence for the price fixing and 10 million for money laundering. So today they would have got 20 years.
And it's not hard to see the disservice the FBI really did to you. I mean, considering now, I'm sure there's a lot more mental health therapy that's going on when you're undercover like that. But 3 years, I mean, the longest anyone has worn a wire, and you're helping them out, and yet you're in this really vulnerable position, results in 3 times as long as anyone else in prison. And not to mention just your mental well-being gets compromised in the process to the brink of suicide, right?
Oh yeah, I attempted suicide twice. I mean, it was basically what happened, Darren. They knew they took me undercover too long. They actually have a guideline. They don't allow an informant to wear a wire longer than a year, because they know what happens when guys like me, and there's been other examples, when they wear them for 2 or 3. In my case, I wore for 3 years. People do fall apart. Even their own trained agents fall apart when they wear a wire undercover longer than a year. So they were very sympathetic about that, and knew that I wasn't thinking in my right mind to write 5 checks for $9 million to myself. That's not clear thinking when you're working for the FBI. So for that reason, they went and fought along with an attorney of mine at the time for a plea deal, a plea agreement. And they received a plea agreement for me that I would have received 6 months in federal prison, in a white collar camp with no fence, no razor wire or anything, a minimum security camp. And my lawyer called me in Chicago and told me about this 6 months plea agreement. All I had to do is sign. And this was for the $9 million. I had immunity, obviously, before that. The 6-month sentence was for the $9 million. So I would have had the lowest sentence of any defendant, any co-defendant at all. And my wife begged me to sign it. And I looked at her and said, she's the one who got me in this mess in the first place. And I wanted to do the opposite she wanted me to do. And so I took that plea agreement, threw it in the trash can, fired that lawyer, fought the case through a system with different lawyers for 10 years. I fought it through the courts for 3 years to get a 10-year sentence instead. And I had a 6-month plea agreement right in front of me. And then when I saw realistically how stupid I made that decision to have 10 years instead of 6, that's when I attempted suicide.
And yet your wife said the 9 years would have been better than the 6-month sentence. What did she mean by that?
Well, she for sure didn't feel that way probably in the beginning at that time. But once we look back and there was a movie on the case, and Matt Damon, my identical twin, Matt Damon, played me in 2009 in a movie called The Informant. Not her faith journey, but more of a crime drama, kind of a secular version of kind of just basically the 3 years of wearing a wire during that period of time of my life. And we did several interviews during that time when that movie was coming out. And they did ask Ginger on one of the CBS interviews about what would have happened if I signed that 6-month plea agreement. And she really looked back and said she thought about that a lot over all these years and felt strongly that I would have came out the same greedy man I went in, and God gave me exactly what I needed, which was 9 years and not 6 months. I think 2 years would have been enough, Darren, but I agree 6 months. You know, there are a couple guys that reached out to me and discipled me and mentored me. One named Ian Howes, another one, Chuck Colson, who was a guy who went to prison in the 1970s for Watergate scandal. He was President Nixon's White House counsel. And if I had a 6-month sentence, I don't even think I would have listened to those guys when they showed up. But when you got 9 years, you're looking for hope. So I was at the end of myself at that point and was really willing to listen and wanting to learn.
Because, you know, obviously I think our audience is picking up the theme that your wife was trying to tell you this all along, but she ultimately had to just really start praying that God would send somebody that you would actually listen to. And CBMC was a big part of that, right?
Oh, absolutely. 7 months before I went to prison after one of the 2 suicide attempts, a man named Ian Howes, CFO of a large pharmaceutical company, had read about me, and he was part of CBMC in the Chapel Hill area where we were living at the time, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And he reached out to me, and that was 7 months before I went to prison, and started taking me through a Bible study called Operation Timothy, really introduced me to Jesus, really. And then my second week in prison, only 7 months after Ian Howes started reaching out to me, then Chuck Colson showed up my second week in prison. And I was really discipled by both of those guys during that journey, Ian Howes and Chuck Colson. And they planted the seed that changed my life forever. Wow. And Ginger had been praying for that for a decade to happen.
Praise God. And at the end of the Discovery Channel, so there's the Matt Damon movie is, for those who haven't seen, is a comedy. And clearly this was not a laughing matter, but there was a much more serious telling of the story in the Discovery Channel's version. But I was curious, at the end of that documentary, you were asked, basically what would you have done differently? And you said that you would have just left the company from the beginning when you saw what was going on. So what do you mean by that?
Well, basically,
because people were looking at you as this hero, the whistleblower that, I mean, just took down corruption at the highest level. And then you said that you would have just left the company.
Well, keep in mind, I want basically, when the movie was turned into a comedy, and the 3 books are very, very serious documentaries, FBI was pretty upset that was a comedy. And so they did the documentary to combat the movie. The documentary came out after the movie, and that's on my website, markwhitacre.com. It was done by Discovery Channel called Undercover. And that was 40 hours of filming. So they show 45 minutes after 40 hours of filming. So there's a lot of editing and cut. So there was a lot more that really was said during that time. And what I'd said during that period of time that, that don't make the final product after 40 hours of filming is that for my family, for sure, what I put them through, really the living hell, Darren, that I put them through, the better thing would have been to leave the company. But the end result of what God did, they took a lot of the faith discussion we had in that Discovery Channel interview. A lot of that was taken out of it to make it more secular in nature. But I talked about, but basically, if I would have stayed at ADM and became the president of ADM that was planned, that was the company's plan, I think I would have lost my family on that track. So this brokenness and me going to prison and finding God saved my family. I would have lost my family. Most people lose their family going to prison. In this case, it saved my family. Right. And I would have not become a Christian if this had not happened. So there was a lot more that didn't make that final piece in that documentary, that for my family's sake, the best thing would have been to leave. But from our family staying together and me getting to know God, it was such a blessing that it happened.
And I mean, it's like asking Joseph, like if you knew that you were going to end up getting put in that position with Potiphar's wife, he would have probably said, I would have never gone there. I would have never gone to, I would have never gone to work there. Or, of course, he didn't really have a choice in his situation, but it's what the enemy meant for evil, the Lord used for good.
Yeah. Romans 8:28.
Right.
I mean, this is really a messy story, tremendously met with 2 suicide attempts, wearing a wire for 3 years, prison for 8.5 years, a 12-year living hell for my whole family, my Ginger and I and our 3 children. But God took that story and took us from ashes to beauty. He did, to the point we're married. Ginger and I are married 40 years here in June this year. I mean, the divorce rate, if you serve 5 years and longer, is 99% divorce rate. The official statistic, if you serve 5 years and longer. I served 8.5 years, and we're married for 40 years. That's a miracle of God. So it's a shame what my family had to go through for me to get better. But the end result of this is a family that went from ashes to beauty.
One of the other parts of the story that I love is that when you were in prison, the same companies that you had robbed and that had been robbed through this price fixing scheme were, like Tyson and Coca-Cola were taking
Coca-Cola and Pepsi
of your family, right? They put together a fund. What happened there?
Yeah, they did. With the $9 million of fines that I had to pay, the $2 million in interest on those fines, the legal fees that I had with the number of lawyers I had over those 3 years. I mean, we were broke by the time. And the other ADM executives, ADM paid all their legal fees, paid their lawyers and everything. But for me, being a witness against them, none of that happened for me. So that was all out of pocket. And they didn't exercise any of those stock options, which was kind of a big part of the reason why I was stealing the money in the first place. The other executives got all their stock options exercised because they were not witnesses against the company. So the ones that went to prison still got their stock options exercised. They did. I did not. And so Ginger was about ready to go home and live with her mom with our 3 children. I mean, she was a stay-at-home mom for almost 10 years at that time. And the companies that were the victims of the price fixing, the Kellogg's, the Tyson Foods, the Coca-Cola, the Pepsi, the Procter & Gamble, they put a trust fund for Ginger for basically forcing me to turn myself in, and also for the help of me wearing a wire for 3 years. They put a trust fund for my family to assist her financially the whole 9 years or 8 years and 8 months that I was in prison.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a miracle. That's a miracle.
And a lot of these have strong Christians at, in those high levels of those companies, right?
Right. That's the ones that actually, a strong Christian, general counsel of Tyson Foods, is the one that got the others on conference calls to make that happen.
Wow.
That trust fund, that assistance, almost like a whistleblower reward for Ginger. And then also God brought a Cornell professor to the prison to visit me, and he brought executives from other companies, pharmaceutical and biotech executives. They had offers for me the day I got out of prison after 8.5 years at age 49 when I got out of prison in 2006. The FBI agents started visiting me in prison, and today they just published literally 7 months ago a very detailed Forbes interview with the FBI agents. Those 4 agents all retired now, become my biggest cheerleaders. So God is really taking what happened in this journey and turned it all into blessings.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of heroes in this story that really don't get brought to the forefront as much. But because the media doesn't really always cover that, but you've been really faithful to give the credit where credit is due. Especially to your wife, Ginger.
He's my greatest blessing by far.
Yeah. And so what, with all that you have gone, because you had just a great job waiting for you when you got out of prison, and then you're still the COO of this company, Cypress
Biotech,
cancer research company, doing more great work there. And also, how do you have time to be the COO of CBMC? You're traveling, and what really was led to you taking that position?
Well, I got out in 2006, and CBMC having such an impact on my life, and the one who discipled me, Ian Owls, invited me to speak at a prayer breakfast, a huge prayer called a Mayor's Prayer Breakfast that CBMC sponsors in hundreds of cities around the country. And this one was in Chapel Hill, and I thought, well, the guy who invited me, who's the guy that reached out to me 7 months before I went to prison and introduced me to Jesus through Operation Timothy and then in the Bible, I couldn't imagine not saying yes. I was really planning on doing that one time and never doing that again, because I just felt like I need to do that for Ian Owls after discipling me and pouring his life into me. And so invited that. I showed up at that 209 prayer breakfast that was on May 7th at that time. And I said, I'm only going to do it one time, never again. It was several hundred people came to that event. And I went and I presented, shared my testimony, what God's done in my life, how I met God, the greed track and the selfishness that I was on before I met God, and what God's done since, keeping our family together, and how the companies took care of my family, and how I was employed when I got out. And I was 3 years out of prison when I presented that. And I tell you, God spoke to me shortly after that he said, Mark, I've taken your life from ashes to beauty. I want you to go share it with the world. Mm-hmm. And then Oklahoma City invited me, and they have a 1,500 people prayer breakfast shortly after the Chapel Hill. And then I went and presented to that. And after that, I started presenting at 80 to 90 prayer breakfasts every year since 2009, the last 10 years, about 8 a month.
Wow.
And the fact I get to so many cities around the country, so many of the CBMC active cities, that they felt, well, who's in the field more than Mark? We should give him a management role while he's there. He can help equip our leaders and encourage our leaders and so on. And that's what developed more from a management team role. And from Cypress's role, the CEO is very active in CBMC in California. He is. So he's a CBMCer for a long time, CBMCer. He loves me sharing my testimony. So I've been going more from a COO to more to a board member, where it gives me a chance, an advisory board member. So that means I review clinical trials and approve their product specs and things of that sort using the background I have, but really spending more time in the faith-based arena, sharing God's story around the country.
Yeah.
And even around the world. Two Februarys ago, I presented in Jerusalem at their prayer breakfast.
I love what CBMC is doing. I mean, these prayer breakfasts have been going on since the lunchtime meetings have been going on since the 1930s, right?
Yes, 89 years since 1930 in Chicago was the first one.
And my dad wasn't a business guy. He's a pastor when I was growing up, but he went to a few CBMC meetings and took me along with them, rolled me out of bed, and just a dynamic group of guys getting together to encourage each other in the Word and to just really exhort each other to reach out to their hurting coworkers, and that's what happened with you, and that really low point in the pit, literally. And one of those CBMC guys reached out to you. How can people get connected with CBMC?
Boy, it's a great organization. If you go to the cbmc.com website, and then there's resources there that you can look what cities they're in. We're in 308 cities around the country. And if you click and put your zip code in, it'll show you the closest CBM city, the closest active city to where you live. And very likely it could be right where you live, the city. I mean, we're from Orange County, all the way to Parsippany, New Jersey, from West Coast to East Coast, and a lot of cities in between. And we're in 40 new cities already just this past year, 42 new cities. So there's what's called Vision 650 that God put on the board's heart a year ago to grow at least 40 cities a year. And we grew up 42 cities last year. And already this year, we're up 6 already.
Oh, beautiful.
6 cities. So if we're not in your city yet, it's very likely we'll be there. Because God's really blessing a lot of growth with CBMC to reach the lost and the unconvinced in the marketplace.
And that's cbmc.org, is that right?
cbmc.com. cbmc.com.
And Mark's website is markwhitacre.com. You can learn more about him there. And the spelling there is WHITACRE, so not ERRE at the end.
That's correct.
And Mark, as we wrap it up here, what would be a piece of guidance in light of your testimony and what you shared here today, or just anything else that's on your heart for our listeners? What would be a parting piece of advice?
2 things I would part with: that if you're in the marketplace and God's nudging you to get into ministry and to kind of have a different season in your life, I just urge you that there's no better place for ministry than the marketplace. Ian Howes was CFO of a pharmaceutical company, and he reached out to me in the biotech industry. I mean, what better place than ministry? Reaching the lost and the unconvinced is where God has us, right in our jobs. What a platform for ministry. So that's one thing I'd like to emphasize. And for your listeners who don't know God, I'd like to emphasize this, that I pray that they explore him and get to know him, because it is so important, so important. The most important decision I ever made was June 4th, 1998 at age 41 to surrender my life to Jesus. And God then guided my life, and I was a train wreck, and he put me back on the tracks and has guided my life the last 21 years. And I urge your listeners, if they don't know God, to have God in their life and let him take that steering wheel and drive that car. I'm serious. But for the ones that know God, look at their work. Don't turn that switch off on Sunday when they leave church. Keep that switch on Monday, and use Monday through Friday what they learned at church, looking at their job as a ministry. You don't have to look too far. It's sometimes across the hall, the house across the street, or the next office right next to you at your work where someone's in need.
Mark, well said. This has been a phenomenal conversation. And I say it often on this podcast that we need more Christian heroes in the marketplace. And I know you've been reluctant to call yourself a hero or have other people call you that, but I certainly regard you as that, not only for what you did by exposing this scandal, but moreover, for the way that you have taken reins there at CBMC to go and spread the gospel among business people in our culture. It's just so desperately needed. So thank you again for your time and your wisdom for sharing your story with us today.
No, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. You can share your feedback and get more information to help you partner with God in business and disciple your company, your industry, and your community at theologyofbusiness.com. The Theology of Business podcast is sponsored by Highbridge Books and Media, a media agency specializing in publishing and promoting the world-changing ideas of inspiring thought leaders through book publishing, website development, publicity, email marketing, social media management, podcast management, and video-based course publishing. Take the next step to share your message with the world by contacting us at highbridgemedia.com. Thanks for listening and keep partnering with God in your business.